Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
And it's a real pleasure to be here today in honor of Professor Satyamurthy. So this work that I will present is by Nikhil, along with Ashwini and myself. And this is a picture of Nikhil with Professor Satyamurthy. I don't have one. Hopefully I will rectify it at this conference. So today I will talk about gauge invariant non-perturbative computations of diatomic low vibrational spectra and strong magnetic fields. It's a mouthful, but I'll tell you why it is important, and it is actually the only way to get this spectra because the experiments are not possible. So this is the logo of my group. So we do a lot of quantum activity, and today I will talk about some theory development for molecules in strong magnetic fields, specifically the nuclear problem. Okay, so this is an introduction I have to always give. So the magnetic field strengths range from really tiny, about 10 to the power minus 12 Tesla in the brain, to about 10 to the power 11 Tesla in magnetars. And this is a huge range, and this range of magnetic fields affects atoms and molecules in very interesting ways. In small fields, nothing much happens. Spherical atoms remain spherical atoms. If you subject it to really high magnetic fields, they become needle-like, okay? And in the intermediate regime, they look like this American football shape, okay? Constricted along the along the axis of the direction of the magnetic field. Now, molecules like H2 have been detected on non-magnetic white dwarfs. However, we do not know much about the composition of magnetic white dwarfs. We know about the atoms somewhat, but whether any molecule exists is still open for question, because the spectra of molecule in fields of strengths 10 to the power minus 1 to 10 to the power. So the high field regime cannot be replicated in experiments on Earth. So we need to rely on computations, and they have to be really accurate. So like Dr. Batra was saying, it's a huge number of lines. It's a huge number of lines that we collect, and you have to identify which molecule corresponds to which. And as I show you some of the computed spectra, you'll realize that it's really a very big challenge to identify molecules from. So the question is basically, are there molecules on magnetic white dwarfs or other magnetic objects? Now, for atoms, what is done is you have these computations of atoms in strong magnetic fields. So these are the energies of various transitions. So each line is a transition energy. Okay, the electronic UV vis in the UV vis region. This is for the helium atom, and on the y-axis there is magnetic field strength, and this is the experimental spectra on top. And whatever magnetic, and at some magnetic field strength, all these peaks will have a corresponding point on these plots. So that's how you identify also the magnetic field of that object. Okay. Recently, electronic structure people have jumped into this thing. So these are EOMCC calculations in strong magnetic fields, giving me the UV vis spectra for sodium, magnesium, calcium atoms, and it is matched with a real collected experimental spectra. Now for atoms, UV vis is fine. But as you know, for molecules, the UV vis spectra is greatly complicated by its low vibrational fine structure. Instead, it is much better to do IR or microwave spectra. And for IR, now we have to solve the nuclear problem. So why is IR spectra better? Dr. Batra covered it very nicely. The signatures are easier to find. Higher frequencies are easily scattered, but IR can penetrate even through thick dust in space. IR spectra are collected in spectroscopy instruments on satellites, as well as in the stratosphere. They're floating around, okay? So they are less, they give you more accurate data, less noise. And they have already been used, for example, to figure out magnetic field strengths in sunspots. Okay, titanium oxide vibrational lines have been used, and these are much more accurate than the atomic UV vis values to get the magnetic field strength. And the most interesting thing is there are molecules which can exist only in the presence of magnetic fields, such as your singlet He2, helium dimer, okay? And maybe they are there somewhere in the white dwarf stars. Now, why do I think that it is very likely that molecules will exist? Magnetic fields actually strengthen the bonds between atoms. So for singlet H2, you see the blue line is the zero field, and then whether it is in parallel orientation, in dashed lines, or perpendicular orientation, which is in solid lines, you get a deeper well. So they are more bound than the zero field counterparts. So in the magnetic, if it's there in the non-magnetic white dwarf, it's likely to be there in the magnetic one as well. But you need to identify the lines. Okay. Also, let's say your triplet H2, which is not bound, that turns up bound. Singlet He2, which is not bound, becomes bound, etc. So these might be in addition found. Okay. Now, if you just want the IR spectra, so this was what? These were just the electronic potential energy curves computed in various magnetic field strengths. So the effect of the magnetic field on the electrons we can already compute, okay? And we have done this with CCSD, so that's basically full CI for H2, in CCPV-TZ basis with gauge including atomic orbitals, which are called London atomic orbitals. Okay, and if I just solve the nuclear Schrodinger equation in this PES, I can also get the new IR spectra lines. But in this case, what we are missing is the effect of the magnetic field on the nuclei. And there is no reason to neglect them because nuclei are also charged particles and they are also moving. Okay. And so that is the problem that we are tackling, how to include the magnetic field on the nuclei. Now, the nuclear Schrodinger equation is typically solved on a grid. Okay. So we need to have some grid-based method to solve it. And anytime you have a magnetic field, you have a corresponding vector potential which enters the kinetic energy term of the Hamiltonian, and that enters as a vector potential which has a gauge freedom. As you know, you can choose the starting point of that vector potential, roughly speaking, anywhere in the world, and it should still give you the same energy. Unfortunately, in most cases, this is very, very difficult to achieve. Okay, and so what we were looking for is a grid-based method which is gauge invariant. So there is also gauge function freedom. So if it is gauge function freedom also, that's great. But at least gauge origin freedom is very, very important. Okay. Okay, I will just skip this since it's late in the day, and I'll just show you the form. So there is the Wilson Hamiltonian, okay, which is a gauge invariant Hamiltonian for a single charged particle in a magnetic field. So it is derived from Wilson's lattice gauge theory, where the quantization of action that Professor Herbola was talking about has been used, and the magnetic field is one case. The uniform magnetic field is one specific case of an electromagnetic field which is quantized using these Wilson loops, quantized with by quantizing the action, and that is counted in terms of Wilson loops, etc., etc. And then you get this Hamiltonian. So I have written this for 2D motion, a single charged particle executing 2D motion in a uniform magnetic field, and this particular form you can find in this 1998 paper by Governale. So it turns out that the Wilson Hamiltonian for a single charged particle in a magnetic field looks just like the Peierls substituted Hamiltonian of condensed matter physics, and this was actually discovered much earlier in 1933. However, Wilson's paper in 1974 does not refer to this substitution. Much later, they have been sort of reconciled, and it is now understood that this Wilson's Hamiltonian will reduce to the tight binding Peierls Hamiltonian for this model that Peierls took in 1933. So they're basically the same, okay? But this is not enough. This is a single charged particle. We have more than one nuclei in a molecule. So what we did was, okay, let me show you the gauge invariance. So that it's very simple. So what is interesting? So here you have this unitary operator, unitary term associated with the off-diagonal terms of the kinetic energy on a grid. This is the 3-point finite difference formula for the second derivative, and you have the off-diagonal terms associated with this unitary term, and this unitary term contains the vector potential, and this is responsible for introducing the so this is responsible for introducing the phase opposite to the phase in the wave function when you shift the vector potential by a certain gauge function. So that undoes, so this unitary operator undoes any sort of gauge function shift that you do, and that makes this Hamiltonian gauge invariant. Okay, now what did we do? So what we did was we tried to rewrite the two-particle Hamiltonian in the presence of a vector potential into a one-particle Hamiltonian. Now in a field-free case, this is very standard. This is what is called moving to the center of mass frame. Now for the charged system, it is not as easy. I mean, okay, so what we do is we just write the two-particle Hamiltonian, and then we separate out the center of mass coordinates and the relative coordinates, okay, and then we define the total mass and reduced mass. In addition, we define three kinds of charges: total charge, some sort of relative mass weighted charge, and a coupling charge, okay. And once you put in these definitions, our Hamiltonian splits up nicely into three parts, one depending entirely on the center of mass coordinates and center of mass and the total charge, HR, which depends on the internal coordinates, and small qr, what we call relative charge, and the coupling term. There is a coupling part of the Hamiltonian, which is HRR, which contains the coupling charge. Now, luckily, the HRR, the whole thing is multiplied by QRR. So anytime QRR is 0, there is no coupling between center of mass motion and relative motion. And this is trivially true for particles where systems where the two charged particles have same charges to mass ratio. And so if you have Q1 by M1 equal to Q2 by M2, you have QRR equal to 0, and the coupling is 0, okay. So our formalism, it is not restricted to situations like this, but we choose systems like this so that so this doesn't become a source of error, because we want to benchmark it first, and we really need very high accuracy data. Okay, so for the time being, we deal only with homodiatomic molecules. Also, your white dwarfs are primarily made up of hydrogen, so I'm expecting that the first molecule to be found will be H2. Okay, so to benchmark this method, we use the analytical 2D harmonic oscillator in a magnetic field. So that's another reason why we first start with the 2D Hamiltonian, although that's not an accurate model for the H2 molecule, because we have the analytic solution and we want to compare. Okay, and as you can see now here that the agreement is really very good. I mean, you have the solid lines corresponding to the analytic values and the dashed lines corresponding to the numerical values, and they lie right on top of each other. Okay, this is very encouraging, of course, and on the x-axis we have magnetic field strength going from 0 to 10 atomic units. Okay, so 0 to 10 to the power 6 Tesla. Okay, and you go a little bit more detail into whether it is accurate. Okay, and then certain problems start showing up little bit. So what we did was, so we have to have reasonable accuracy across a wide range of magnetic fields and across several excited ground and excited states, and it has to be stable across the whole range. Okay, because we want to describe spectra for different magnetic field strengths. So that is actually already a pretty challenging task in the zero field situation, because as you know, your excited state descriptions with any model whatsoever goes down, like the accuracy goes down as you go higher up in excited states. And along with that, the magnetic field, what it does is it at zero field, what is a vibration eventually. So for the harmonic oscillator, zero field is pure vibration, and at a very high field you get Landau levels, which are cyclotron orbits. So that's a pure rotation. So the character of your wave function will also change dramatically across the whole field strength. So it's a challenging task. Okay, so what we did was we took the lower energy levels which form the lowest Landau band, and we checked that the grid length to accommodate 99% of those wave functions, whatever it is, and it turned out to be 1.6. Yeah, but what was a little bit fishy was that the zero field was worse than the high field. Okay, so we were not very happy with that, but that did get published. Okay, so the referees did notice also, but they accepted it. But now we have done better, so I hope you will be happy. So this could be traced to the fact that degeneracy was not very well reproduced. So you see that with 65 grid points, we had like for the highest sort of energy levels between which we were considering transitions, all these four, 0, 3, 0, -3, 1, 1, 1, -1, they should have been degenerate, but they lose degeneracy pairwise because of our numerical method. And with 65, it was 58 centimeter inverse. Okay, so and so then we improved our code and we thought, okay, we'll do better. So lower grid spacing, errors became higher. We lost more degeneracy. That was very disappointing. And then we thought, okay, if errors are going up, we have more boundary points, maybe our boundary condition needs improvement. We did that, and we got 2 centimeter inverse improvement. This was very bad. Finally, I know this is like reinventing the wheel. People who've done grid-based methods probably know all this. This is my first attempt. So this way. So then what we did, we checked each wave function, okay, and we found that these high, so where you have the second Landau level states, 1, 1, 1, -1, etc., they have very long tails somehow, and we needed a bigger box length. So we went from 1.6 to 1.92. So that's a 20% increase. And then even without boundary conditions, our errors came down. And then in addition, if we put in proper boundary conditions, as we should, okay, then we got a few centimeter inverse accuracy. Now this accuracy is good enough for comparison, and it makes sense to go ahead. So we moved ahead, and I'll show you what happens to the spectra itself. So this is the analytic spectra, pure 2D harmonic oscillator. So they just keep splitting. With 1.6 box length, we had some loss of degeneracy, which led to this extra 2 lines instead of 1. And now with the bigger box length, we got right on top of analytic results, which is great. So we moved on to a real potential energy surface. This is a full CI CCPV-TZ electronic potential energy surface for H2. First one is 0 atomic units, and the next one is 3 atomic units. So 0 is just, so it's of course a 2D, it's a potential energy curve. It's just been inflated to show you the angle dependence on this axis to compare with the 3 atomic unit field. And in the 3 atomic unit field, you do see a change with the angle, the bond and the field, the angle between the two. So this is the 0 degree and this is 90 degree. So as you, from the parallel to the perpendicular orientation, you have the well going higher but narrower. Okay, so the molecule in its equilibrium geometry prefers to be parallel to the field, singlet H2, but it is more constrained or confined in the 90 degree. Okay, and it can be shown, which I'm not discussing now, that it is actually the perpendicular component of the field which causes the magnetic confinement, okay, or introduces cyclotron motion. So first, okay, so let me just 1 minute. Yeah, so you can see it here. So this is deeper, the blue part, but the confinement is more. And then you can see the same thing in a different perspective. So this plot in the inset, the blue line is the zero field, okay? And the well depth goes up with field strength, and the dashed line is again parallel and solid line is perpendicular. And if you and this pink one is the 3 atomic unit, and if you expand it, it looks like this for various angles. And this yellow one is basically the 90-degree angle on which I will focus now. So when we okay, so this is the 90-degree one. And now if I calculate the or plot the equilibrium energy against the angle, okay, so you will see that a rotational barrier grows. So the x-axis is the angle. So to go from parallel to perpendicular, okay, there is an increase in energy. So this is a rotational barrier. And at 3 atomic units, the gray plot, that barrier is about 28,000 centimeter inverse. Okay. Remember that white dwarfs are very hot objects. They have temperatures of about 10,000 to 14,000 Kelvin. However, that corresponds to about 28,000 centimeter inverse corresponds to about 40,000 Kelvin. So even for surfaces of white dwarfs, which are really hot, the system cannot freely rotate. And this will show up in the spectra. So that is probably the most significant feature that will show up eventually. But exactly at what frequency, that needs to be computed. Okay. And the dissociation energy also goes down, which means that the likelihood of finding, so if you were dissociating or forming the bond, there would be preferred orientation. So the x-axis is the angle, but this we have not yet explored, but it will be interesting. Okay, now, sorry about that. So with the 2D harmonic oscillator model that I talked about before, we don't have any, we have only vibrations, and you have some shifts according to the magnetic field applied on the nucleus and the electron. And then if I do just a calculation with the field on the electron, okay, then the pattern changes a little bit. And then when I include the Wilson-Hamiltonian, so when I say field on the nucleus, I mean I'm using the Wilson-Hamiltonian along with the computed PS of the electron in that particular field strength. Then again you get another pattern. So we are able to reproduce, and this is something that is at very low temperature. So these lines come from a full 100% Boltzmann population at the lowest level. Okay. And in this last case, when you have a 2D PES with a perpendicular magnetic field on both electrons and nuclei, we have anharmonicity, and we have magnetic field mediated rho vibrational coupling. So there are two kinds of rho vibrational coupling, one through the anharmonicity, one through the magnetic field. But that rotational barrier is still not playing a part, because this field is remaining perpendicular to the plane of motion of my molecule. Now I have to go to 3D in order to allow the angle of the molecule with the field to change. And when I do that, from these 2-3 lines that I have, even with 100% Boltzmann occupancy in the ground state, I get several more lines, okay, coming from this hindered rotation at various fields. And eventually this, what is called libration, pendular vibration. How much time do I have? Time is finished? Okay, so, I'll just finish in 1 second. And then if I go to the 12,000 Kelvin average of white dwarf temperatures, it becomes very, very complicated. And this is something that was computed in 2022 with classical NVT simulations. So we are happy at the moment with similarities. So one thing we have already noticed in the last few days of looking at those, well, our plots are not very good. We'll improve them before we publish. This peak here, they have very low intensity, but for us, this has much higher intensity than this peak. So that is probably one difference between classical and quantum. Other than that, of course, we will look for more differences. Okay, so I'll skip the summary in the interest of time, but I want to show my team, which is 3 PhD students and other interns and master's thesis. And this is Nikhil, who will probably finish next year. He's an amazing student and has done all this work. Thank you.
Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.